The crossbow bolt had pierced clean through my side, just below the ribs where the mail offered little protection. I felt it enter, a white-hot punch that stole my breath, and I felt it exit, tearing muscle and flesh as it passed through my body like God's own judgment. My knees struck the blood-soaked earth of Acre's outer wall, and the sounds of battle became distant, muffled, as though I had plunged beneath dark water. Brother knights rushed past me, their white mantles streaked with crimson and ash, their war cries rising to heaven as the Saracen forces pressed against our failing defenses. I tried to stand, to lift my sword once more, but my legs would not obey. The world tilted. I watched my own blood pool in the dust, mixing with that of a dozen fallen brothers, and I understood with terrible clarity that I was dying here, alone amid the chaos, forgotten already by those who fought on. My vision narrowed to a tunnel of gray light. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the banner of the Order, black and white, the cross of our sacred duty, burning against the merciless Syrian sky. I woke to silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of abandonment. The sun had moved across the heavens. Shadows stretched long and purple across the killing ground. Bodies lay everywhere, twisted in the attitudes of violent death, their faces turned toward Mecca or Jerusalem or nothing at all. Flies had already begun their work. I lay among the dead, half buried beneath the corpse of a Mamluk warrior, whose throat I had opened hours earlier, in what seemed now like another lifetime. My wound had stopped bleeding, though whether from clotting or from having no more blood to give, I could not say. Every breath was a knife twisting in my side. I tried to call out, but my voice emerged as barely a whisper, swallowed immediately by the vast indifference of the battlefield. The army had moved on. The siege continued somewhere beyond the broken walls, but here, in this field of the dead, I had been left behind. Left to die as so many others had been left, as war demanded, as God apparently willed. For a long time I simply lay there, staring at the sky, waiting for death to finish what the Saracen archer had begun. I prayed, though my prayers felt hollow, words spoken into a void that gave no answer. I had killed men that day. I had killed many men over the years since taking my vows, all in the name of Christ, all in defense of the Holy Land. Their faces visited me now as I waited to join them in whatever darkness or light awaited beyond this world. I wondered if God would weigh my sins differently because I had killed in His name, or if blood was simply blood, and all of us, Templar and Saracen alike, were equally damned for adding to the ocean of suffering that was this war. The wound in my side throbbed with each heartbeat, a rhythm that seemed to grow slower, fainter. I thought of my father's farm in Burgundy, of autumn mists rising from the fields, of my mother's voice singing hymns in the small stone church where I'd first learned to pray. I thought of the brother knights I had lived beside for 7 years, the men who had become closer than family, who had moved on without me because that was the nature of war, because the living must always leave the dead behind. But I did not die. As the sun set and the sky turned the color of old blood, as the first stars appeared like distant candles in a cathedral of infinite darkness, something stirred within me. Not peace, not resignation, but fury. A hot, cleansing rage that began in my chest and spread through my limbs like fire through dry timber. I had not survived the journey to Outremer, had not endured the desert heat and the fever and the endless death, had not sworn my life to the defense of pilgrims and the protection of the Holy Sepulchre, only to die forgotten in the mud like a dog. I had taken vows. I had made promises before God and the Grand Master and my brother knights. Those promises did not end simply because my body had been broken, simply because I had been left behind. I pressed my palm against the wound in my side and felt the torn flesh, the exposed muscle, the terrible damage the bolt had done. Pain exploded through my torso, bright and clarifying. I welcomed it. Pain meant I still lived. Pain meant I could still serve. I rolled away from the dead Mamluk, inch by agonizing inch until I lay face down in the dust. My arms trembled as I pushed myself to my hands and knees. The world spun violently and I vomited bile and blood onto the ground between my shaking hands, but I did not fall. I remained there on all fours like an animal, breathing in ragged gasps until the dizziness passed. Then I looked up, searching the field of the dead for what I needed. My sword lay 10 paces away, half buried in sand, its blade still dark with the blood of men I had killed. Beyond it, scattered among the corpses, I saw pieces of armor, torn surcoats, broken shields bearing the red cross of our order. Slowly, painfully, I began to crawl. Each movement sent fresh agony through my side. Each breath felt like it might be my last. But I kept moving. I reached my sword first and closed my fingers around the familiar grip. The weight of it was a comfort, a reminder of purpose. I dragged it with me as I continued crawling, gathering what I needed from the dead who no longer needed anything at all. It took me an hour to arm myself, an hour of crawling and resting, of fighting through pain that would have been easier to surrender to, of forcing my hands to work when they wanted only to be still. I found a mail hauberk that was less damaged than my own, and stripped it from a brother, whose face I recognized, but whose name I could not remember. I found greaves in a helmet. I found a surcoat bearing our cross, torn but still white beneath the blood, and I pulled it over my head with shaking hands. By the time I was finished, by the time I had strapped on every piece of armor I could find, full darkness had fallen. The moon rose over the killing field, painting everything silver and black, transforming the dead into strange sculptures, monuments to the futility of our holy war. I used my sword as a crutch and pulled myself to my feet. For a moment I swayed there, certain I would fall, certain the effort had been too much. But my legs held. My body, broken as it was, remembered how to stand. I took one step, then another. Each step was an act of will, a small victory over the death that still waited patiently for me. I turned toward the distant glow of fires on the horizon, toward where the siege continued, where my brothers fought on without me, and I began to walk. The journey back to the siege lines was a passage through hell. I walked through the night guided by the sound of distant battle, by the glow of fires consuming the city we had sworn to take. My wound reopened and bled again, soaking through the padding beneath my stolen armor, running hot down my leg with each step. I fell twice, 3 times, and each time I lay in the dust wondering if this would be the time I could not rise. But each time, I found the strength. I thought of my vows, of the words I had spoken when I knelt before the Grand Master and felt his sword touch my shoulders. Non nobis, Domine, non nobis, sed nomini tuo de gloriam. Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but to thy name give glory. Those words had become my entire existence, the purpose that animated my broken body when by all rights I should have been a corpse cooling in the Syrian night. I passed more dead as I walked. Some were ours, some were theirs. All were equal in death. All had given everything for causes they believed righteous. I prayed for them as I passed, though my prayers were barely whispers, though I had no water to spare for the ritual washing of my face and hands that should precede such prayers. God would understand, I told myself. Or he would not, and I would be damned. But I prayed anyway because it was all I could offer them. Near dawn I heard voices ahead, Saracen voices, speaking Arabic in the quick, urgent tones of men on patrol. I crouched behind a broken wall, my hand tight on my sword, and watched as 3 men passed not 20 paces from where I hid. They were looking for survivors, for the wounded of both sides who might be helped or finished depending on their allegiance. I waited until they had moved on, then continued, moving more carefully now, aware that I had entered the no man's land between the armies, that I could be killed by either side if I was not cautious. The sky began to lighten in the east, that first gray promise of dawn that I had seen 1,000 times that I had never expected to see again. I climbed a low rise and looked down at the Christian encampment spread below me, at the hundreds of tents and fires, at the siege engines standing like patient giants before the walls of Acre, at the banners of 12 kingdoms and orders stirring in the morning breeze. I saw our banner, the black and white of the temple, flying above the largest pavilion, and something broke inside my chest, some dam that had held back every emotion I had suppressed during that long night. Tears ran down my face, cutting channels through the dust and blood that caked my skin. I had made it back. Against every expectation, against reason itself, I had returned. I walked into camp as the sun broke the horizon, as men were emerging from their tents to begin another day of war. At first no one noticed me, just another armored figure moving through the morning chaos. Then a young sergeant looked up from the fire he was tending and his eyes went wide. He shouted something I could not quite hear, and suddenly there were men running toward me, brother knights whose faces I knew, whose names I had shouted in battle and prayer. They caught me as my legs finally gave out, lowering me to the ground with surprising gentleness. Someone was calling for the infirmary, for water for the chaplain. I heard Brother Guillaume's voice, sharp with disbelief. "We thought you dead. We saw you fall. How are you here?" I could not answer. My lips moved, forming words that would not come, and then the Grand Master himself was kneeling beside me, his weathered face close to mine, his hand on my shoulder. "Rest, brother," he said, and there was something in his eyes I had never seen before, not pity, but something deeper, something like awe. "You have earned your rest." But I shook my head, finding my voice at last, forcing the words through cracked lips. "Not yet. The battle. I can still fight," and I could see in their faces that they believed me, that they understood what I had done, that they knew I had walked back from death itself not for glory or recognition, but because my vows demanded it, because true service knows no release save death, and death had not yet claimed me completely. They carried me to the infirmarer's tent, where Brother Matthias, who had been a physician in Lyon before taking the cross, examined my wound with gentle hands and increasingly troubled eyes. The crossbow bolt had missed my vital organs by the width of a finger, he told me, but the wound had festered during the night, and infection had already begun its work. He cleaned it with wine that burned like molten iron, packed it with herbs whose names I did not know, and bound it tightly with strips of clean linen. "You should be dead," he said simply. And I had no answer for him because he was right. I should have been dead a dozen times over. That afternoon, as I lay fevered and drifting in and out of consciousness, I heard the horn sound the call to battle. The assault on Acre's walls was beginning again, the great final push that would either break the city's defenders or break us in the attempt. I pulled myself from the cot where they had placed me, ignoring Brother Matthias's protests, ignoring the pain that threatened to split me in half. I armed myself with hands that shook from fever and weakness, strapped on my sword and walked toward the sound of war. Brother knights tried to stop me, to force me back to the infirmarier's tent, but I pushed past them with a strength I should not have possessed. The Grand Master himself blocked my path, his hand on my chest, his eyes searching mine. "You have already given everything," he said quietly. "No one would question your honor if you rested now." I met his gaze and saw that he was testing me, that he wanted to know if I truly understood what I was doing. "I gave my vows," I told him. "My life belongs to the Order, to God, to the defense of the Holy Land. That does not change because I was wounded. That does not change because I should have died. I will fight until I can no longer stand, and if I fall, I will fall among my brothers, not in a sick tent." He studied me a moment longer, then nodded once and stepped aside. I walked to the siege lines with my brother knights around me, their presence a fortress more secure than any walls. We formed up before the great wooden towers that would carry us over Acre's defenses, and I took my place in the front rank as I always had, as my vows demanded. The pain in my side was a constant scream, but I had learned to exist beside it, to acknowledge it without letting it master me. The Grand Master raised his sword, and 5,000 voices roared the battle cry of our order, "Non nobis domine." The towers lurched forward, pushed by straining men, creaking toward the walls where Saracen defenders waited with arrows and Greek fire and stones to hurl down upon us. I climbed with my brothers, my sword in my hand, my prayers on my lips, and when we reached the walls and the killing began in earnest, when steel met steel and men fell screaming to the stones below, I fought with the fury of one who had already died and been reborn, who had nothing left to lose because everything had already been surrendered. I saw Brother Guillaume take an arrow through the throat and fall without a sound. I saw young Raymond, who had arrived from France only 3 months earlier, cut down by a Mamluk blade that opened him from shoulder to hip. I saw horrors I had seen 100 times before and would see 100 times again if I lived. And I fought on because fighting was all I knew, all I had left, all I could offer to God and the Order and the brothers who fell around me. The walls of Acre fell on the third day of the final assault. We poured into the city like a flood, like the wrath of an angry God made manifest. And what followed was slaughter and chaos and the terrible machinery of war unleashed upon the defeated. I will not speak of all that I saw in those hours, of all that I did in the name of victory and holy purpose. War strips away the pretense of civilization, reveals what men truly are when death surrounds them, and mercy seems a luxury none can afford. I killed that day, killed until my arms were too tired to lift my sword, killed until the wound in my side reopened completely, and I left a trail of my own blood through the burning streets. But I did not fall. I would not allow myself to fall. When the fighting finally ended, when the city was ours and the surviving defenders had surrendered or fled, I stood atop the walls I had fought so hard to take and looked out at the sea beyond, at the endless blue horizon that had carried so many of us to this land of blood and faith. Brother knights were kneeling around me, some in prayer, some in exhaustion, some dying from wounds they had sustained in the final push. I knelt with them, my hand pressed to my side where my life was slowly leaking away, and I thanked God for allowing me to fulfill my vows, for giving me the strength to return when I should have remained among the dead, for permitting me to stand with my brothers when the walls finally fell. The fever took me that night. Brother Matthias said I raved for 3 days, speaking in languages I did not know, calling out names of the dead, fighting invisible enemies in my delirium. When I finally woke, weak and hollowed out but alive, he told me the infection should have killed me, that by every principle of medicine he understood, I should not have survived. But I had survived. I had survived the crossbow bolt and the long night among the dead and the infection and the final battle. And I did not know if this was God's will, or simply chance, divine purpose, or meaningless luck. The Grand Master visited me when I was strong enough to sit up. He brought other brothers with him, senior knights whose faces were maps of old battles, old scars, old decisions that had cost them pieces of their souls. He told me that the Order was awarding me a commendation for valor, that my name would be recorded in the histories kept at the temple in Jerusalem, that I had brought honor to my vows and to my brothers. I thanked him, but the words felt empty. I had not fought for honor or recognition. I had fought because I had sworn to fight, because my vows demanded it, because there was nothing else I knew how to be. You walked back from death itself, the Grand Master said, and there was wonder in his voice. You refused to die when death had already claimed you. That is faith made manifest, brother. That is what we all aspire to, that complete surrender to purpose, that absolute commitment to our vows. I wanted to tell him it was not faith that had driven me, or not faith alone. It was also pride and stubbornness and fear of being forgotten, and rage at the thought of dying alone in the dust while my brothers fought on without me. But I said nothing, because perhaps he was right. Perhaps all of those things were simply different faces of faith, different expressions of the same fundamental truth, that we are what we choose to be, that our vows define us, that surrender to a purpose greater than ourselves is the only meaning we can hope to find in this brief, violent passage from birth to death. I recovered slowly. The wound in my side never truly healed, leaving me with a scar that pulled tight when I moved quickly, that ached in cold weather, that reminded me every day of the crossbow bolt that should have ended my story on that distant battlefield. But I returned to service as soon as I was able, took my place in the ranks once more, fought in the battles and skirmishes that followed Acre's fall. I served in the Holy Land for another 7 years, through victories and defeats, through the slow, grinding loss of everything we had fought to gain. I saw Jerusalem fall to Saladin's armies. I saw the great fortresses of the Order abandoned one by one, as our numbers dwindled and our resources failed. I saw brother after brother die, some in battle, some from fever, some from wounds that festered and poisoned, despite the infirmarer's best efforts. I grew older, harder, hollowed out by the endless cycle of violence and loss. The young knight who had taken his vows in Burgundy, full of faith and certainty and dreams of holy glory, became someone else entirely. A warrior who understood that faith was not certainty but choice, that holiness was not purity but persistence, that glory was a word spoken by those who had never truly known war. But I never forgot that night among the dead, that long walk back to the siege lines, the choice I had made to rise when I could have simply remained still and let death take me in peace. In the end, I returned to France an old man at 40, my body broken by 2 decades of war, my faith intact but transformed into something I could not have recognized in my youth. I retired to a small commandery in Provence, where I spent my remaining years training young knights who would make their own journeys to Outremer, who would learn their own lessons written in blood and suffering, and the slow revelation of what service truly demands. I told them my story sometimes on quiet evenings when the wine flowed and the firelight made shadows dance on the walls. I told them about the crossbow bolt and the field of the dead, about the choice to rise when falling would have been easier, about what it means to keep your vows when keeping them requires everything you have and more besides. Some understood. Most did not truly. Not until they faced their own moments of decision, their own dark nights when death offered the comfort of release and duty demanded they refuse it. I hoped they would remember my words when those moments came. I hoped they would find the strength I had found, or if not strength, then at least the stubborn refusal to surrender that had carried me through that long night and back to the siege lines and into battle once more. I think often now, as my days grow short and my old wound aches with the approach of winter, about what it all meant. Whether the sacrifices we made, all the blood and suffering and death, served any purpose beyond the perpetuation of more blood and suffering and death. I do not have good answers to these questions. The Holy Land is lost, the kingdom of Jerusalem a memory, our great fortresses occupied by those we fought so long to defeat. But I know this: I kept my vows. When I was left for dead on that battlefield outside Acre, when I could have simply closed my eyes and surrendered to the peace of oblivion, I chose instead to rise, to walk, to fight once more. That choice defined me more than any battle I fought, any enemy I killed, any honor the order bestowed upon me. Not because it was glorious or wise or even particularly sane, but because it was what my vows demanded, what I had sworn before God to do, and I did it. In the end, perhaps that is all any of us can hope for: to be faithful to the promises we have made, to serve the purpose we have chosen, to rise when we are knocked down and walk back into the battle even when every rational part of us screams that we should simply lie still and let the darkness take us. I was the wounded Templar knight who was left to die, but I walked back into battle, and in that walk, in that refusal to accept the death that seemed my fate, I found the truest expression of what it means to be a knight of the temple, a servant of God, a man who keeps his word even unto the very end. Non nobis Domine. Not unto us, O Lord, but to thy name give glory. These were the words I lived by, the words I nearly died by, and the words that will be carved on my tomb when at last I am permitted to rest. They are enough. They have always been enough.